So Germans might be very open when it comes to nudity and talking about sex and letting it all hang out at the sauna, but when it comes to data privacy, that is a whole different ball game. Yeah, it's a whole different ball game. Hello zusammen, welcome back to my channel. I hope that you guys are all doing well and taking care of yourselves. Today we're going to be talking about Germany and privacy, more specific data privacy. For those of you who don't know, Germans are very, very private when it comes to their data and how it is being used. And this is something I had completely no idea about when I first moved here. I didn't even know this was a thing, and I wanted to share some insights on how you can see this very visibly in your day-to-day, and that way you can learn a little bit more also about why Germans are so private. So why are Germans actually so private when it comes to their data? Well, for those of you who don't know, Germany has had a history of state surveillance where the government has actively spied and surveillanced their people, both during the Nazi era and also during the communist era with the Stasi. So this has really made Germans very, very skeptical about what the government is actually doing with their data. During the communist era, the state would actually spy on those living in East Germany. They would intercept communication between people living in the East, in the West, and they would even put people in jail if they were said to be against the state or against the Communist Party. And similar things happened during the Nazi era with the secret state police. So naturally, throughout history, and because of all of the things that have happened, Germans nowadays are very secretive, and they like to keep things very private when it comes to their personal information. And they're very weary in general about how their data is being used. And actually, when Germany did reunify in 1990, when the East and the West became the Germany that we know today, measures were put in place to ensure that this type of state surveillance would no longer happen. Germany does have very strict data privacy laws, and this is very evident even in day-to-day life. So as someone coming from North America, coming from Canada, where the issue of data privacy up until now never really seemed like a big deal. We're quite open with how our data is being used. It's not something that we really were taught to think twice about up until now, which is quite interesting because now people are much more aware of how, you know, bigger companies like Google, Facebook, TikTok are using information. But, you know, prior to moving here, that was something that was never on my mind, and something that people back home just don't really think about or never really used to think about. So coming here and seeing Germans being so private towards sharing their data was a really big shock for me. So for any of you who are planning to move here, or you've just arrived and you're wondering why Germans are a bit like this, it's definitely because of their history. And I wanted to give you some examples that I see in my day-to-day life of how Germans really protect their privacy here, and how they are quite secretive and not as open as perhaps people in the US and Canada are when it comes to sharing personal information. So one of the things that you were definitely going to notice, and this was a shock to me, was if you go into Google Maps and Google Street View, you'll actually see that a lot of the buildings here are blurred out. And I first noticed this when I was looking for apartments and I wanted to get a general idea of where the apartment was and, you know, what was around it. And it is so crazy to see that the buildings are actually completely blurred out. So for me, this was a really big shock. I had never even seen this. I had never seen a city or country have buildings blurred out and locations blurred out. But yeah, Germans just like it this way. They don't necessarily want a big corporation like Google watching over them and taking pictures of their streets and their buildings and their cars. It's just not something that they feel comfortable with. So if you are ever looking for apartments here, or you want to see where certain landmarks are, don't be surprised if you notice that a lot of things are blurred out. out. The other thing that you'll notice is that registering online for government documentation is just really not a thing here. This is really evident when you go and register your address, which is something that you legally have to do when you move to Germany. You have to register with your city and let them know where you are living. And once you move, again, you have to go ahead and register the address that you're currently at. Now back home, this is something that would take minutes to do. I could literally do it from my couch. I could just go online and register and make the change, and it would not be a big deal. But here it is definitely a big deal. And if you ever move here, if you've lived in Germany, then you know this to be true. So for instance, the times that I've had to go register my address, I literally have to go online and pick a time, and these times are booked way in advance. So sometimes you can only find appointments for like 2 months later because it's such a tedious process and such a manual process. So once you find your appointment, you go there, you have to literally go with a stack of papers with your passport and with your rental contract, and it's just a lot of paperwork that is involved for something that literally takes less than 10 minutes once you get there, and that could easily be done online. But the fact that you literally have to schedule your appointment in advance, take time off of work, or take time out of your day to go and do this is just a very strange concept to me. And again, this is something that every single person living in Germany finds tedious, especially if you live in a bigger city like Berlin or Frankfurt or Munich, where these appointments get booked out way in advance. But because of the way that Germans are when it comes to sharing their data, they really don't like to do these types of things online, and they're still quite weary of entering personal information online. Now, I did read that there is a draft right now to make this registration process, specifically for registering your address, available online finally, which so many countries already offer, but it is still yet to be passed. So I don't know if it's actually gonna happen, if they're going to approve it and make it a new law and it's gonna be available, but as of yet it is not, and it is still something that is very, very manual and very time consuming, especially if you're like me and you've had to move 6 times throughout your 3 years of living here. It's just an annoying process. So yeah, try not to be too shocked when you move here and you realize that a lot of things that your country already does that is available online is just not available here, because again, people are just very, very protective over their data, and they rather just do things in person to make sure that the information gets into the right hands and it doesn't get lost in the world of the internet. So yeah, that is the second thing that you will notice. The other thing that I've also talked about before, but ties in really nicely to the whole concept of data privacy or data privacy. You guys let me know, do you say privacy or privacy? Because I always switch between the two. I like privacy, it just sounds better, but Canadians say privacy. I don't know. Let me know down below how you guys say it, the American way or the British English way. Let me know. But besides that, something I've talked at lengths about before is the fact that cash is still very much king here. And that is, again, because Germans don't really like to pay with credit card or do digital transactions. Again, they are very, very private about their information, and they don't necessarily want the government to be able to track their expenses and where they're at. So this is something that really ties into this whole discussion. Now, things have started to change a bit more just given the whole pandemic and the whole situation that's happening, and a lot of restaurants and businesses are now accepting card payments instead of cash. But I know for a fact that Germans still just prefer to have cash on hand, and they prefer to pay with cash. And I think that this is just something that is going to take a bit longer for Germans to adapt, because it's still a very, not a very secure process in their mind. I've had friends, for instance, say like, oh no, I don't want to pay with credit card. Like, they just feel very skeptical about it and for me, this is really, really shocking. Now I'm more used to it, but especially when I first got here, I thought that was super weird because back home, we literally put everything on plastic. Carrying cash is sort of like really annoying to us. We don't like to have, you know, coins in our pocket and bills. It's just like an annoyance to us. So for us, we just much rather pay with our debit cards or our credit cards and just deal with it that way. But yeah, it's just something that will take a bit more for Germans to adapt. But it is happening. I talked about this and how, you know, Germany is changing in that way. But even if you guys watch that video where I talk about this, you can read the comments, and Germans are very, very passionate about still paying with card. I'll go ahead and link the video right over here if you want to learn more about this and get more insight into how Germans actually think about paying with cash versus paying with credit card or debit card, because it is very, very interesting, at least in my opinion, to see just how different cultures think and what different cultures think is acceptable. But this is a big one, and you will definitely notice this if you come here, and a lot of tourists notice this as well, because again, in their countries, the concept of paying with cash is very outdated, and here it is still very much king and the way that people like to do things. The other thing I wanted to talk about is social media. Now, of course, Germans have social media, they use it, and they love to use Facebook and Instagram and all of that. That's the same, but what you'll notice is that if you ever go ahead and add a friend to Instagram or to Facebook, you'll notice that the majority of the time their account is put on private, so not everyone can see their pictures and their status or whatever they're putting on their social. And then you'll also notice the other thing is that their name or username has nothing to do with their actual name. So they'll have some sort of code name or some sort of different username that you wouldn't be able to find if you weren't, you know, aware of it. So a lot of the people that I follow, a lot of my friends, they don't actually use their real name, and again, they are just much more private about that. And also a lot of the times for the little icon pictures, for their profile pictures, they won't actually use their real picture. They'll use something completely random. So that is super, super interesting, because again, back home, we are so open when it comes to putting our lives on social media, and, you know, not really thinking twice about whether or not we should use our real profile picture or use some sort of pen name as our username. We will just put it all out there without thinking twice. And now I know that this is changing in North America, and everyone's becoming a lot more aware about how big corporations are using data. But up until now, it hasn't really been a discussion back home. But it seems like Germans are very, very aware of this. And again, rightfully so, I think that it is something we should be aware of. But if you are coming here and you are not used to this type of privacy and you're wondering why they are so secretive, that's why. But yeah, that is what I wanted to talk about today, and hopefully it gave you more insight into why Germans are so private, and just some examples of how you can notice this in your day-to-day life here if you are planning to live here or you are interested in visiting. These are definitely things that you will notice. But if you did enjoy this video and found it entertaining, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and please don't forget to hit subscribe. I do post new videos every single week, and I talk about my experiences as an expat living and working in Germany. I talk about the German culture, and I also share a ton of tips with you so that you can also make the move over here. But thank you so much, everybody. I hope that you guys are having an awesome day, and I'll talk to you all in my next one. Tschüss!